back to insurance matchmaking. I've got a couple things I want to go over today, but one of the things I want to touch on first is unfortunately we've had some quite the staffing changes at the office. I think I mentioned on a previous show that Bree has taken another day job. She is still available to assist her clients. She still wants to be part of Matchmaking Insurance, but she wanted to go a different way with her main employment and do insurance kind of as a as they say a side hustle, which is fine. I'm not discouraging her doing that. It still helps me. And like I said, she will keep up with her clients. We sent out our most recent newsletter. We welcomed Lena back from maternity leave. And after a couple of weeks, Lena figured out that's not going to be the best situation for her family. And so she's going to be a stay-at-home mom for a little bit longer. And, I understand it, but I really miss having her. It was great having her back. She's very efficient. And if she doesn't come back to me someday, if anybody wants to snag her up for whatever what job that may come open for her, she does do some teaching. She was studying biological chemistry, I think it was, at Tech, and so she has been teaching a science class for a homeschool group. So she's not just an admin person. She's got some other skills too. So I mean she'll be a great employee for someone, and again, hopefully maybe she'll be a great employee for me again. And I've mentioned Kalia has been dealing with her little one having some health issues, and they're still working with Vanderbilt trying to figure out what's going on with him and what's a plan of action. And so Kalia is still with us, but she's going to be doing a lot of remote work. And the reason I bring that up is there's going to be a lot of times there isn't somebody at the office. Like right now, I'm in the studio recording my show. Somebody had already called as I was just driving here, and no one there to answer. But we will get back with you as soon as possible. Please leave and I've said this before in previous shows, please leave a detailed message, not just a, hey, Matt, call me back. Tell us why you're calling. And again, if you're trying to reach Bree or Kalia, put that in your message. There again, you may be a referral, or you may know someone that's a referral, or you may be referring someone to them. I'm not the only show in town there when it comes to Matt Libby Insurance. It's my name on the door, but I'm not the only agent. Kalia's still working as an agent, doing some admin work. She will be at the office some. We have a note on the door that says, hey, you may show up during normal business hours and nobody be here. There's, the number will be is posted there on the door, and call us, because a lot of times it may just be I'm 5 minutes out. To this morning again as an example, when I get done recording the show, I need to run to the Dollar Tree and get the prizes that I give out for the Senior Center Bingo, and so it's just kind of convenient. I'm in the same part of town when I get done with the radio. Dollar Tree is just around the corner. I just get on Willow for about half a mile and I'm there. So it's convenient to kind of knock these two things out at the same time. So I'm going to get to the office a little later today than normal, and even later for me than normal. But there's nobody there right now. We also, on that sign on the door, is a QR code that will, if you scan it, will take you to my calendar. And my calendar will have the times that I'm not available, like this time right now. So if you went to try to book an appointment, you can't book it immediately. The way I have it set up, and then it kind of keeps appointments from sneaking up on me, is you can't schedule anything sooner than 4 hours later than you're trying to schedule the appointment. So if someone was scheduling it now, my watch says that currently it's 9:20. They would not be able to schedule an appointment until like 1:30. So that way gives me a little bit of time to react and go, oh, I need not start this because I got somebody coming in at that time versus somebody showing up and expecting me to be ready for them. But if it's on the calendar that I'm going to be available at that time, then I'm going to be available at that time, and if not, I'll contact you. Well, I had a little mix up this week. Was my wife had something scheduled for me on, and this is for actually later this week. Well, it'll be in the past once you listen to this show. But Kalia had scheduled an appointment from someone who had called in for to go over Medicare, and I'm looking at the sheet, and my wife and I were talking about something, and she's like, "We got that appointment Thursday," and I was like, "What time?" And they were both scheduled for the exact same time. I was able to get a hold of the Medicare client, and we just switched the appointment to Friday instead of being on Thursday. So we can be flexible. I said, we will get back to you, and especially, and again, go back to, I pound this drum, leave a detailed message. If you're looking for an ID card, or you have a question that I'm going to have to call the insurance company to get your answer. If I don't get around to calling you back till 5:15, because that's the first time I can get back and call you back. Now I can't call them until the next day to ask your question. Versus if I knew ahead of time. Sometimes, like if I'm driving, I used to do a lot of this. I used to do my road warrior days, as I called them, a lot of in-home appointments. I would, if I had to call customer service, I would do it when I was driving, because maybe I had an hour drive or more. Sometimes those hold times could be 30 minutes or more, and then once you get somebody on the phone, you got to conduct that business with them. So I would call those customer service calls when I was having my windshield time, and that way there wasn't anything else I could do but drive. Didn't get to listen to the radio generally when I did that, because once I called, it cut out the radio. But I wasn't wanting to try to do something else on my computer. I wasn't doing anything else, and it made good use of that time. It actually made the drive go faster too, because I'm sitting there listening to the hold music and waiting for a customer, or I should say customer service, I should say a broker support person to come on the line so I could take care of the issue for the client. So that's why it's important if you can leave us a detailed message, or if you got a question about your policy. Maybe I need to go and pull your folder and look up and remember. I had a client call just recently, was asking about a plan that she's on, which is a hospitalization plan, and I'm kind of going to cover some of that stuff as I get into details here in a bit. But her issue was she's probably going to have an upcoming surgery, and she wanted to make sure that the plan that we had signed for, because it had been about 3 years since she enrolled to that plan. So I had to pull up her records and look at it and go, yep, you do have the surgery benefit. So what the good news there is, she can go have her surgery. She's going to have a copay with her Medicare plan. But the supplemental insurance she has for the hospitalization is going to reimburse her. And it may not be the whole the copay for the surgery. I think it's going to be, she's going to get a check for $250. She may have to pay $275 for the surgery, but so that surgery ends up costing her $25 instead of $275. So those can come in handy. And I was able to check that for her. It wasn't a message, but if she had left me a phone message, what she was calling about, I would have been able to look that up before I talked to her. I was talking to her when she called in, which wasn't a big deal. I was able to get it, but I would have had the information a little quicker for her. She wouldn't have to wait for me to look things up. So that's kind of where we're at on that. But I'm still here. Like I said, if you stop by the office, I apologize if you missed me, but that's why we have the sign on the door. We're going to put some stuff out on Facebook, and we'll publish something out in our newsletter. If you were one of our clients getting our newsletter, you can get that. Or, if you would like to get our newsletter, you can always reach out to us and say, hey, can you put me on the list for the newsletter? It's real easy for us to do. We just need your name and an email address. So if you would like that, it just kind of keeps you up to date what's going on in the office. Kalia puts a recipe in. Sometimes she'll do a little crossword word search thing if we're dealing with a holiday, and just things that relate to what we're doing. And, because this month is, as you found out if you listened to the show last week, it is a stroke awareness month. It's also Disability Insurance Awareness Month. And there was one other thing that Kalia was getting ready for the newsletter that was, this was the month for that too. So the months aren't just for one thing. There's usually other things that they try to emphasize during that month. So those are the kind of things we put out in the newsletter. Had somebody stop in the office yesterday and was asking me about some of our changes. So I read your newsletter every month. I enjoy getting that, so I know it's being read. But so that's kind of the as the Matt Libby Insurance turns soap opera. But like I said, we are still here to help you. And what I wanted to get into, and I actually think I'm going to save the home health thing I'm going to try to do 2 shows today while I'm here. And so it'll probably be, might be next week's show, or it may be a little bit later. But I wanted to touch base again on the prescription things, and I may do that after the break. But just those reminders, give us a call. The phone number, it's 931-881-3969. Leave a detailed message, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. The other thing I guess I could say, if you're listening to this show, we are now a Christian radio station versus the news talk. So if you're a loyal listener or a new listener, I do know that Kalia posted yesterday on Facebook. Her family is continuing asking for prayer for their family. So if you are so inclined, please add them to your daily prayers, and hopefully they'll get a kind of a handle on what's going on with their son, and there are other children in the family. So it's tough that you've got a 8-month-old that's not doing real well health wise, and then you've got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old that you have to they still require things. So it can be and if you've remember having a house with toddlers, add a medical situation to that, and it can be very overwhelming. So anyway, after the break, I am going to be talking about some prescription issues, and we will cover that. Some of the stuff I've covered before, and I'm going to reiterate some of it. I actually brought some notes today. I'm usually winging it and saying, I should have brought that in with me. So hang tight. We will be right back after the commercials, and I'm going to talk about things going on with the Part D prescriptions, or not necessarily just Part D, but just prescription things in general. We'll be right back.
Join Upper Cumberland Habitat for Humanity for their Dream Builders Putnam Luncheon, Tuesday, May 13th from 12 to 1 p.m. at The Edge at Life Church. You'll get to hear from donors, homeowners, and volunteers. Admission is $25. And if you're interested in being a table host, please reach out to Casey at 931-528-1711, extension 6. It's Upper Cumberland Habitat for Humanity's Dream Builders Putnam Luncheon, May 13th, 12 to 1 at The Edge at Life Church.
Hi, this is Mark Gall, your Twin Lakes Business Solutions Consultant. From all of us here at Twin Lakes, congratulations to all the graduating seniors here in the Upper Cumberland. As you graduate, take pride in your hard work and dedication. Cherish the memories you've made along the way with family and friends. And at this time, look forward to what's ahead. Your future is bright, and Twin Lakes is cheering you on every step of the way. Congratulations, class of 2025.
And now, back to Insurance Matchmaking with Matt Libby Insurance.
All right, and we are back. As I mentioned before the break, wanted to go over some issues dealing with prescriptions and talking about, the Part D issues. If you are on Medicare and have Part D, you probably already know a lot of this right now. The deductible for prescriptions and it's on most plans. It can be up to $590. Some plans may have a slightly lower deductible, and a lot of times, if they do have a deductible, most of the times it's gonna apply to Tier 3 and higher. Tier 3 is where we start the pricing for the brand name drugs. Tier 1 and 2 are generally your generics, and I always say generally because it's not specific. Those tiers, that's what they're designed for. 1 and 2 is generic. 3 and 4 is usually brand name, but in what it is, Tier 1 is the preferred brand names. Those are the least expensive ones. They don't mind filling them because they pay next to nothing for them. And then Tier 2 are drugs that are generally are generic, but they're going to be a higher cost. And sometimes I say higher cost, they're a $20 drug instead of a $5 drug. But they can also be a $300 drug and still be considered a tier 2, which is great if you're paying a copay and don't have the deductible. You're going to pay $5 or $10 depending on your plan for that little bit more expensive drug. And then sometimes they're brand name, but they're just very inexpensive. They've been around a while, and people still prefer to get the brand name. Maybe there's not a generic available, but it's not a real expensive. And I've found sometimes it's strange, it's a different subject, but sometimes you can find a brand name drug on tier 2. Tier 3 is preferred brand. Tier 4 is non-preferred, but it's not necessarily non-preferred brand. It's just non-preferred drugs. And then Tier 5 is usually your specialty drugs. Those are going to be the real expensive ones. And depending on the plan, it could be a high copay, or it could, and I say copay because it could be a co-insurance. It could be a percentage of the cost. So those are some things to kind of watch for as they passed from the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. We now have a maximum out-of-pocket on Part B drugs. Part D drugs, I'm sorry. I said B as in boy. I didn't mean to. Part D drugs, but it's Part D covered drugs. Every insurance company out there has a formulary of what drugs they cover. They have to cover at least one drug in each class, but it may not be the one that you want. And what's surprisingly, I've found that sometimes there may be a generic for something, and this insurance company covers the brand name, doesn't cover the generic. And the cost of the generic is still really high. It's like the copay on the brand name drug on your plan is less than if you just paid out of pocket for the generic version of it. Doesn't happen very often, but there are a few things like that. One of them I know is I think it's Restasis, for the dry eye. That was one of them. There was another. I can't think of the name of the drug, but I had a client we were looking at. It was like, oh, make sure your doctor prescribes the brand name and not allow a substitute for a generic, and that way it's covered on your plan. So that $2,000 maximum, like I said, it covers the drugs that are on the formulary, and once you hit that $2,000 cap for the year, you don't pay any more for your prescriptions, and that will reset on January 1st. So for some people, that's come in very handy. Last year in 24, and people have been on Part D, they're familiar with what's infamously known as the donut hole. With this $2,000 cap, that went away, but there was always, and they're still classifying it as what they call catastrophic coverage. And in previous years, once you went into that infamous donut hole, you paid a higher percentage for your prescriptions until you spent a certain amount, and it was also combined with support, from discounts from the manufacturers and such. But when you hit an amount, and it was like somewhere around it, the last year that they had it in place was like $8,000. The good news was generally you weren't going to have that $8,000 out of pocket. It usually was about $3,500, $2,500 to $3,500 depending on what prescriptions you had, but it was not a fixed amount. So when you hit that amount, that threshold, that you left the coverage gap, or like I said, infamously known as donut hole, you still had to pay 5% of the cost of the drug. Well, if that's a $10,000 drug, 5% is still quite a bit, and there was no cap on that. So you could have had more than that $2,500 to $3,500 out of pocket, depending on your prescription. In 2024, again, as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act, that 5% coinsurance went away, and so once you hit the catastrophic cap, you didn't pay any more. But again, that could have been anywhere from $2,500 to $3,500 that you had spent out of pocket. So that was the thing that changed, where this year there is a $2,000 maximum. Now that's going to go up next year. The latest numbers I've heard, it's going to be $2,100, so it's not moving a lot. But the deductible is going from $590 to $615, and I think that number is a firm number. And I'll update later if I'm giving out wrong information. But just know the deductible is going to go higher. I expect to see more plans with deductibles. We had several Medicare Advantage plans this year that added deductibles. Some of them went all the way to $590. Some of them did $200, $250. Some of them included all tiers of drugs, and then you had the other ones that excluded tier 1 and 2. And that's usually the typical. I don't know that I've seen. Actually, take that back. I'm trying to think. I think there's one plan out there that the deductible excludes tier 1, but tier 2 drugs are subject to the deductible, which in some ways that makes it a little easier to sometimes reach that deductible. If it's on all of them and you're going and you're picking up some tier 1 or tier 2 drugs, and so maybe you're spending $40 that month or when you go to the pharmacy, that when you go back a couple weeks later and you have something like Xarelto, Trulicity, Januvia, all those a lot of stuff you see advertised on TV, you're gonna finish out the deductible paying for that drug, but it's still going to be a few $100s, but it won't be almost $600 because you've already spent some towards it. So that could kind of help. The other thing is, I mentioned that $2,000 maximum. That $590 deductible is included in that amount. So you have to pay the deductible, but once you paid that $590 deductible, you have less than $1,500 to spend to hit your maximum out of pocket. Now, some people will spend a lot. They may end up spending $1,600 or $1,700 and not hit the $2,000 max. And then you got others who would have spent $3,500, but they're going to hit their maximum. So what I kind of wanted to get into on that was there are still alternatives to not have those big expenses. I mentioned before I was in a conference back in April in Orlando in the founder of the Canadian Med Store. And don't be confused, the Canadian Med Store is not in Canada. It is in Florida. Zephyr Hills, I think is the name of it. It's in the Tampa area. But I met Bill about 5 years ago at another Medicare event, so I've run into him a couple other times. He's been here at events here in Tennessee. He was in Orlando, but when he was speaking, and one of the things I hadn't thought about I've been putting some of my clients on a more expensive drug plan because of the cost of their drug. It was going to cost them less to be on that more expensive drug plan than one of the plans with the lower cost. And it doesn't seem like it makes sense, but now if you did the examples, basically one's a $95 plan and the other one's a $27 plan. And when we figured it out with the monthly premium and hitting the maximum out of pocket, and here's the other thing that I've talked about this in another show. One, the $95 plan doesn't have a deductible. It's basically kind of rolled into that monthly premium. So it just kind of makes it a little easier to pay that bill instead of having to pay that $590 right off the bat when you go to the pharmacy. The other thing is the way the government figures that max out of pocket is based on a standard amount. So there's a standard copay for the tier 3s, and it's a percentage of the cost of the drug on tier 3 and in 4 and 5. If you have a copay that's less than the standard amount based on the percentage, you're getting credited with actually paying that standard amount. So the example I gave on the client I had Jardiance and Xarelto, two drugs running him, the base cost him was like about $500 for a 1 month supply. Not 3 months, but 1 month. So the credit on that, because it's a fixed copay and the deductible is figured into the monthly premium on that $95 drug plan, my client was going to have somewhere around $1,600, a little over $1,600, but $1,600 total outlay for the year. And that includes some other like tier 1, tier 2 drugs like blood pressure, cholesterol things. That $27 drug plan, even though it was basically $70 less a month in premium, would have had over $2,200 out of pocket. So it made sense to go with the higher cost drug plan. Well, the one thing that Bill presented and I don't remember now if he presented it in his presentation or just when we were having a conversation, but the Canadian Drug Store has several drugs that they're offering for $50 a month. And so instead of paying a high premium, what they're suggesting is go ahead and get a low premium drug plan and then not get your prescriptions use your Part D through your pharmacy and through your insurance, but to get your prescriptions from the Canadian Drug Store. And this is the list of the drugs that you could set up for $50 a month. And I don't know if this is an extensive list or if this is just a sample. Eliquis, Xarelto, Farxiga, Pradaxa, the Brio Ellipta, which I believe that's an inhaler, the Ventolin HFA, I know that is an inhaler, Spiriva, another, believe that's another COPD drug. Then you've got Janumat, Januvia, and Symbicort were on this list for $50 a month. So using the example of my client that had the Xarelto and the Jardiance, if he paid $50 a month for those, he would spend $1,200 on his drugs, and he could have maybe even had that zero premium drug plan out there that just covered his tier 1 and 2. So those are some things that I hadn't really thought of, and then I've got a list of their main drugs that they would cover, and they set up to get so many for a 30-day supply. Believe it or not, there is a generic for Eliquis getting through the drugstore. You can get Cymbalta. Let me see. Cymbalta was not on the $50 list, but you can get 80. It's weird. It's not always 90. Sometimes it's 100. This time here, it's a 60 milligram and you get 84 tablets. So that's approximately a 3-month supply for $210. And I'm not saying that's a great bargain, but then again, it might be for you. It just depends on how it's affecting on your insurance. And like I said, you don't have to have Part D. You could just have a high deductible drug plan, or you don't have insurance for prescriptions. You can get, all you need is a prescription, and you can fill it through this. So get a hold of me if you're trying to figure out a way to save on your prescriptions, and I'll pass and get you in touch with Amber at the Canadian Med Store, and she can figure out if they've got something that they can get for you. And it's just a matter, you have to have a legitimate prescription, but what you send them the prescription and pay them for the prescription, they send that information to the Canadian pharmacy, and it's mailed to your door. So that will cover you. And as we always say at Matt Libby Insurance, we can cover you from head to toe, and it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. And until next week, keep listening to Grace 107.7, and we'll see you Saturday at 10 o'clock.
You've been listening to Insurance Matchmaking with Matt Libby, your path to health, life, and Medicare coverage with Matt Libby Insurance.